Greetings! I'm starting a new short format for my presentations in addition to my longer historical philosophical formats. These new ones will be short, bi-weekly, maybe tri-weekly to start with, and progressing towards daily dispatch. The reason is that I enjoy way too much going down the research rabbit holes. I spend a lot of time researching the historical and philosophical background materials for my two central theses, the two main arguments that justify my making these video series in the first place. I just like research. I start following this line, following that thread, and then I put it aside, say, oh yes, I will make another good one. At any rate, I get very involved with it, so they end up taking a long time to do. So the reason I'm doing this video series, at all is number one, the centrality of the ecstatic experience, or the varieties of ecstatic experience in all human culture, and why it is so relevant in today's social dilemma. One obvious application of that cultural knowledge is applying the efficacy of experience and the common sense in evaluating politically generated narratives. This relationship between experience and representation is a critical outcrop, kind of, from the ecstatic experience, the studies of the ecstatic experience. Number two is the thought experiment that is my concept of technoanarchism as an antidote to ideology in general and as a potential model for how to resist and cancel any movement towards the monopolization of power, regardless of the source. The third is a little bit more loose, but I propose that I feel I can act as a bridge between traditional leftist positions and what we call, for lack of a better term, conservative positions. What I'm really promoting is freedom and creativity, what I feel is the natural evolution of humanity in general and Western civilization in particular at this pivotal time in history. I was raised within a liberal military multicultural background, and I've spent my life in the arts of humanities, blah, blah, blah. I've mentioned all this. I understand very well where the liberals of our times are coming from. Many of them are good people who mean well, but have been utterly duped by the cultural Marxists working through our universities. So the purpose of these dispatches is, instead of waiting till I fully present my models of resistance, which I will continue to bring out over the next few months, I'd like to begin putting my concepts to use right now. Events are happening much faster than I, and I think the rest of the pro-civilization, freedom, and creativity front ever anticipated. So here it is. Dispatch number one. Gavin Newsom, the plague, and the great hoax. So let's revisit the Gavin Newsom dinner party. First of all, he planned it. He planned it in advance. Number two, he created a guest list. Just happened to be people in the medical establishment. I mean, how ironic is that? Three, he rented out a space indoors. Some people have mentioned something about there were three walls and one was open. It wasn't open. It was a glass wall and it was shut. So he rented out a space in advance, indoors, in one of the most expensive restaurants in the area. Four, everybody showed up. Five, so did he. Six, they had a great time. I believe their alcohol bill was like $10,000. Seven, they all went home. And eight, no one got sick. No one died. And no one wore a mask. You really have to let that sink in. He pre-planned it. This is the governor that implemented one of the most draconian lockdowns in the United States. He planned this in advance. He invited the people. He made the reservations. They all showed up. When the outcry came about, it was whether or not he's a hypocrite, or him saying, I made a mistake. People, that is so stupid. First of all, who cares if he's a hypocrite? He's a politician anyways. Who gives a rat's ass whether or not he's a hypocrite? What does that have to do with anything? He made a mistake. Obviously he didn't, because no one died. No one even got sick. Do you see what's at the center of this? He knew it. Gavin Newsom knew that no one was going to get sick. He knew no one was going to die. He knew this. So there was no mistake. He didn't make a mistake. He got caught, but he didn't make a mistake. He knew full well what he was doing. But not only did he, but the people that came to the party. And they're in the medical industry. People, you got to snap out of it. Chasing down this ridiculous notion of who's a hypocrite and did he have bad judgment. This is preposterous. You're not seeing what's right in front of you. He knew this, people. That's what you need to see. There was no mistake, no lack of judgment. And again, who gives a rat's ass if he's a hypocrite? What does that have to do with anything? He knew he wasn't going to get sick. No one in the party was going to get sick. And no one was in danger of dying. The man isn't a brave, bold, adrenaline junkie or an imbecile for that matter. He simply knew there was no risk. Let that sink in, people. He knew there was no risk. But that's not what you know. So let me make this a little bit more clear. This is a hypothetical dinner party. And there's another hypothetical in there that you'll see when I get to it. It should put this in a more obvious light. Let's say somebody, maybe Gavin Newsom, he decides to have a party, a dinner party. He sends out the invitations, and he sends them out with very clear instructions as to what this party is. So that anybody who goes to it knows what to expect, and they must agree to those directives. So here's what's in it. As you walk into the party room, there's going to be a bowl. There's 24 people invited. In the bowl are tabs of 6 different colors, and each color has four tabs, and each tab is numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. And the party is going to be 4 hours long. Everybody comes in, everybody reaches in, grabs a color. The color will have a number on it. Once everybody is in and everybody is seated, the first hour is going to be announced. They have their cocktails. Maybe they're just standing around. They're not even sitting down yet. And they divide the tabs into 2 groups of 12. Flip a coin, the remaining 12 into 6, and they continue flipping until they arrive at 1 color. Let's say it's blue. That means all the blue people, 1, 2, 3, and 4, at the beginning of each hour, they have to walk up to a table that's set out in the middle. In the middle of this table is a revolver. Now, this is a fictitious revolver because it has 144 possible cartridge holders, which of course none of them do, in the barrel. And they will flip the drum, and point it to their heads and click. It's 1 out of 44. Probably nothing's going to happen. But that's the instructions. That's the directives for the party. And everybody who went there knew this. They knew it going in. So anybody who went to it knows what this party is about and what's expected of them. Now I ask you, how many people you know would go to that party, much less host it? Right? Only 2 kinds of people, everyone. Adrenaline junkies, who just for the thrill, just to spice up a party, would do something that crazy. Or a pack of imbeciles. Now, say what you want about Gavin Newsom. I don't think he's an adrenaline junkie, and I don't think he's an imbecile. The fact is, he knew nothing was going to happen. Because if he did, he wouldn't have gone. He wouldn't endanger his family. He wouldn't endanger himself. He wouldn't endanger those people. Now remember, Cuomo and the gang sold us all on this epidemic as being this lethal monster, right? Cuomo was saying it's like pointing a gun at somebody and shooting them. You could kill somebody with this. So after going over that little hypothetical situation, you can see what I'm driving at. He wasn't taking a risk. If he really thought that somebody could possibly die, he wouldn't have had the party. He's not an imbecile. He knew there was no risk. Yet he implemented one of the most draconian lockdowns in the whole country. The same guy who implemented one of the most draconian lockdowns is the same guy that invites at least something like 20 people to an indoor party without masks. The focus of the anger should have been that he obviously knew that the plague is nowhere near as lethal as presented. But the plague's supposed lethalness was the entire justification for the lockdown. He proved that was a hoax. Not the plague itself. The plague is real enough. But its lethalness. If the plague was nowhere near the lethal level that supposedly justified the lockdown, then obviously the lockdown was not justified. And he, Gavin Newsom, knew it all along. He's not an adrenaline junkie, people. He's not an imbecile. The answer is very simple. He knew nothing was going to happen. The plague was not the hoax. The lockdown was the hoax, obviously. He proved it. He planned the party, sent out the invitations to people in the medical industry, no less. They all went. They all had a good time. Obviously, they knew they were in no risk of dying, not even of getting sick. If they had thought they were, no way they would have gone. Again, look at the analogy that I drew. Sure, 1 out of 144, you're probably going to live through it, but would you go? Of course not. They went because they knew. They weren't afraid. People, how come they weren't afraid and you are? Isn't that the real question you should be asking? People, admit it. Your common sense has been screaming at you for months. Some of you for the entire year. But you've been too afraid to listen to it because you're afraid of the incrimination you would receive at the hands of your own friends. You knew it, you could feel it, that there was and continues to be something not quite right about this insane lockdown. Yet you were afraid to even say it out loud. And even now, a year later, you still are. As I talked about in the other video, Gramsci, the fellow from the Marxist Frankfurt School, he targeted common sense as an obstacle to the Marxist re-engineering project. Common sense was defined as embedded structured narratives generated by the hegemony of social institutions, a product of cultural hegemony. People, common sense is not a structured meta-narrative, the result of white, patriarchal, Western, blah, 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 blah. Common sense is the synthesis of everything you experience, your entire body and all of its senses, including, but also against, the background of social narratives. Your common sense is what you synthesize on your own as an individual from the totality of your environment. You must trust your common sense, people. It's all you have in the end. But the maniacs in power don't want you to trust your common sense. They've said so. I read you the quotes in the last video. I'm not making this up. So I ask you again, don't you sense that there is something insane in this continuous lockdown? Why aren't your kids in school? Why are you still wearing a mask? Why are restaurants, churches, and gyms not fully open everywhere in this nation? Could it be that Silicon Valley and the Demo Rat Party saw an opportunity to make trillions through the great hoax? I don't know, but Mr. and Mrs. Liberal, neither do you. You don't know the why of this hoax any more than I do, so don't pretend or delude yourself into thinking you do. You don't know why this hoax has been perpetuated, but you do know at some level that something isn't right. Your common sense told you so months ago. Your common sense has surely alerted you to question the lockdown's validity. So why are you afraid to voice that concern? Why are so many of you still afraid? Who's behind that? Who wants you to stay afraid, to shut up and obey? You should be asking yourselves that. I used to end my videos with, did I mention that cultural Marxism must be driven out of our universities? But we're way beyond that. Now it's hashtag defund, reconstruct the universities, if not abandon them altogether. Ladies and gentlemen, and the rest of you, the lockdown was a fucking hoax. It was, and still is, a hoax. And you, at some level, know it.